What's up, grinders? So today we're going to be reviewing how Esperanto almost took over the world, which is a pretty clickbaity title, but I'm going to check it out for a number of reasons. One, I speak Esperanto. This was the first language that I learned to fluency. I've been speaking this language for more than 15 years now, which is quite a bit of time to dedicate to one language. Jesus, I'm getting old. Two, I've had Esperanto speakers contact me, sending me links to this video and asking me my input on it. That either means it's got some really good stuff or some really bad stuff, or maybe just a little bit of both, I guess. Obviously, being an Esperanto speaker who's made like 500 videos in the language, I am curious to see what others say. Especially when their video gets 350k views and my top Esperanto video got like 40k views. So sad face for being the worst YouTuber in the world, I guess. You're probably wondering how many people actually speak this language based on all that. Well, estimates vary wildly. Anywhere from, say, 50,000 all the way up to 2 million, with native speakers being around 2k. It's really hard to say because those estimates, some of them are really old, some of them are out of date, some use really bad methodologies. But I think, based on my personal experiences, based on some raw data I've actually seen via the Amikumu app and other things like that, that there's probably only a couple of 100k who actually speak this language at a conversational level, and probably less than 100k who speak it at a very high level, such as myself. And beyond that, it's really hard to say. You can kind of judge by looking at how many books are published in Esperanto and stuff like that. It's not like a massive language, but at the same time, it's not like a small language that's on the verge of dying out. It's growing, and it has been for quite some time. So let's begin.
The year is 1887. The problem? Everyone won't stop killing each other. The solution? Create a language that transcends borders. Something to bring about an end.
Okay, so he just said the problem is people are killing each other. Solution is a greater language. Now, you might think that's really stupid. People have been killing each other with the same language for forever. Just look at the American Civil War. Well, this was at a time in European history, strangely enough, where this was actually a belief that was held. They thought if we all just shared the same religion, the same language, we'd be right. We'd get along with each other and we'd stop murdering each other for stupid reasons. Which I know in retrospect, and even, I don't even know why they thought that at the time, but a lot of people actually thought this. And to prove that a lot of people thought this, Esperanto was not the only language created to solve this problem. There was other languages such as Volapük and a few other smaller ones, and then offshoots of Esperanto and other languages as well. So it was definitely a belief that was held at the time.
To hatred, division, rivalries, even war. This is the story of Esperanto and how me and you almost ended up speaking it.
Okay, that didn't happen. So you will hear Esperanto, I'll call it propaganda, but it's just passionate people who really love their language. They will say, yeah, Esperanto almost became, a world language. There was this time at the League of Nations where basically Esperanto was proposed, and unfortunately the French shot down the solution, so Esperanto just missed out becoming the global language. But for a number of reasons, that actually didn't happen. And the main one being is, if you're the French and your language is the international language, are you going to vote against your own language as being the international language? Come on, guys. Come on. Are we being silly here? Okay. Let's see if he covers this in the video anyway.
In a small corner of the Russian Empire, one man, Ludwig Leitzer Zamenhof, was growing up in a city divided by language barriers.
You know what's so funny? And it's maybe because they don't have photos, but every time you see a photo of Zamenhof, he's like this old man with the beard, the glasses, everything you see right here. But the dude, when he made the language, he was younger than me. He was like 27-ish or something. Like, I don't know, like he was late 20s. So it's kind of crazy. Or where they always show like an old picture of him. It kind of reminds me of like how you'll see like pictures of, say, the people who founded the American, modern state with the Constitution, all that stuff. And you always see like an old man who looks wise and stuff. But realistically, these people are like younger than the majority of us watching this video. What are you doing, man? If you're older than 30, you have no excuses. This dude here created an entire language spoken by hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. And then you've got other people over there who literally fought against the British Empire and established an entire country. While you're just sitting here wondering how to learn a language. Sorry, I was not meant to berate you guys, but I always find that funny.
In his hometown of Białystok, people spoke Russian, Polish, Yiddish, and German, often without understanding one another. An eye doctor by trade, Zamenhof was a natural polyglot. It's hard to put a figure on exactly how many languages he learned throughout his life, but it's thought to be more than 10, including Russian, Polish, German, Hebrew, Latin, and Greek.
He also clearly understood English to a degree, because some of the first words that you learn within Esperanto are clearly derived from English.
When growing up, he saw for himself how miscommunication and misunderstanding could lead to tension and violence, as Zamenhof once reflected in a letter he sent to his linguistic colleague, Nikolai Borovko. The place where I was born gave direction to all my future struggles. In Białystok, the inhabitants were divided into 4 distinct elements: Russian, Poles, Germans, and Jews. Each of these spoke their own language and looked on all the others as enemies. I was taught that all people were brothers, and this was always a great torment to my infant mind. I often said to myself that when I grew up, I would certainly destroy this evil.
Yeah, that did happen.
So at the age of 28, he set to work to fix this.
Actually, he did not start at 28. He started way earlier than that. He started before he even went to university, because there's like a quote I remember reading in a book about his life, where he created the basics of the language, and his dad, this is so typical, his dad was like, stop wasting your time doing something that will have no impact on the world. And when he went off to university, his dad destroyed all his notes. Because, you know, my son is out here wasting his time doing pointless stuff, which is so funny. But then he actually had to create Esperanto again, and obviously it was different to his first version because he's learnt more and all that type of stuff. But there's still snippets of the original version, you can find it, and people use it kind of as like a proto-Esperanto or an archaic Esperanto in texts. Like, for example, there's a very common short saying, which is Jam temp esta, which is actually not like modern Esperanto, but it's proto-Esperanto.
Devising a language so simple that anyone could learn it. His language was designed to be easy. Most of its influence comes from Romance languages, but there's also stuff there from Germanic and Slavic languages.
And also Yiddish, although the Yiddish influence is kind of hidden behind Germanic.
And the grammar is as simple as possible.
Although Yiddish is a Germanic language. So what am I saying?
For a start, there are no masculine or feminine nouns found in languages like German and Spanish. And the
I was thinking more Hebrew then. Yeah, there's some influence from Hebrew as well.
language itself only has 3 simple and consistent tenses. Past,
Wait, that's not past tense, that's present tense, my man. Mi amas means I love.
present,
That's past tense. Mi amis.
and future. Each type of word also
That's correct.
has a specific ending to show exactly what it is. For example, nouns end in O, adjectives end in A, and adverbs end in E. Esperanto is also what linguists call an agglutinative language, meaning prefixes and suffixes can be stuck onto its root words to create entirely new meanings. Take the word liber, for example, meaning free. Add an edge at the end to turn it into a physical place, an O to show it's a noun, and mal at the front to flip its meaning to the opposite. And
That prefix right there, mal, is one of the most powerful prefixes in Esperanto. You can literally slap it on anything, create the most random words possible. And some of them actually end up as being slang. So for example, you've got trinki, which means to drink. But you could say mal trinki, which means to undrink. I'm going to leave that up to you guys to try and figure out what you think that means.
and all of a sudden you have Malibareo, a physical place without freedom. Or in other words, a prison. This is the beauty of Esperanto. With just a few rules, you can create thousands of new words. Just have a listen to how a fluent speaker sounds.
Saluton de Budapeŝto, Hungario.
Oh man, I was hoping he would use one of my videos.
Mi estas Stella, kaj la lingvo kiun mi parolas estas Esperanto. Kio estas Esperanto? Zamenhof en la 19. jarcento kreis tiun ĉi artefaritan lingvon, kiu estas mia denaska lingvo.
Oh yeah, she's got friggin' native Esperanto privilege over here. She learnt it obviously growing up. In fact, I've actually stayed with a native Esperanto speaking family when I went to Germany. It was quite interesting because I traveled to Germany, and in the Esperanto community there's something called Pasporto Servo, I think it's called. I haven't used it for a long time, so I forgot its name. Anyway, so it's a service, it's like couch surfing, where you basically can stay at the houses of Esperanto speakers. And I stayed at this one house, and the woman there, she had 2 kids, and they were native Esperanto speakers. And in fact, she had learned Esperanto from her dad, who had learnt it from her granddad, and the granddad was the one who had to do the hard work like me and actually study the language. So for them, it was more like a cultural heritage language type of thing, as opposed to like some idealistic thing that they went out of their way to learn.
So Zamenhof set out the rules and regulations of his new language in his first book, A Nuevo Libro, which was
They call it the first book, but it was nothing more than a pamphlet.
published in 1887 under the pen name Dr. Esperanto, meaning the one who hopes in the language. No prizes for guessing where the name came from. Esperanto's growth was slow at first. In fact, to get his language off the ground, Zamenhof asked people to sign a pledge that they would promise to learn and use Esperanto once 10 million others had made the same commitment.
Yeah, that was in the back of the pamphlet, or the booklet, whatever you want to call it.
Though only a few thousand responded, Zamenhof was undeterred, and as the years
Okay, I gotta rehear that. I think I misheard that.
commitment. Though only a few thousand responded, Zamenhof was undeterred, and as the years went by, Esperanto's popularity began.
The funny thing is, he actually did make that commitment in the booklet. He said, if 1 million people agree to learn this language, then we'll all learn it together. But people just started learning it and started using it. And this actually relates back to a previous language, which was called Volapük. And I could go into the whole history of this, but Volapük, if any language was going to have taken over the world as a constructed language, it actually would have been Volapük. Because Volapük, it sounds so funny, the name, but funnily enough, the name comes from English in some ways. This language itself came before Esperanto, and it happened at the right time. It exploded in popularity. It started getting taught everywhere, even in embassies. There was courses for it. People already started organizing entire conferences, and the only reason that this language did not actually take over in Europe is because the creator of the language was he just did not want to let go of control of the language. So basically it caused a lot of infighting between the most fervent speakers of the language, and then it started to fracture, and then Esperanto came out, and a lot of those people who were in it for more the ideal as opposed to, the language in any way, they saw Esperanto, saw it was easier, and then they just swapped over to start using Esperanto. And this actually fractured the whole movement about having a unified language. And then Esperanto started growing, but it actually grew quite slowly because it didn't have that initial steam that Volapük had. And funnily enough, today, there are barely any speakers of Volapük left. In fact, you could probably grab every speaker of Volapük and chuck them into one chat room. That's how many speakers are left.
Began to increase. Esperanto clubs and societies popped up across Europe, publishing magazines, newsletters, providing a place for speakers.
In fact, a lot of these first clubs in Europe and stuff and magazines were originally Volapük magazines and clubs, and then they just swapped over.
To connect with one another. And the language also found a place in the growing internationalist and socialist movements, gaining traction in the late 19th century. It even found support from thinkers at the time, such as...
So yeah, Esperanto actually, that's how it got into China. So it got into China via basically the intellects of the communist movement, who went over to China, worked with the Chinese and spread communism there, and that's when Esperanto also spread within China.
There's J.R.R. Tolkien, Leo Tolstoy, and Pope Pius X.
In fact, for the Vatican, you can actually listen to an Esperanto radio station to this day. I remember I used to listen to it because it had really good pronunciation.
In fact, in 1930, J.R.R. Tolkien would actually be appointed as an advisor for the British Esperanto Association, and the language almost found a place to be used in the real world in a place called Neutral Moresnet.
Okay, so this is not really like a country or anything. So basically this area you got the borders between these two countries, and they didn't agree on their borders, and there was kind of like this little part here where they didn't agree. This is the equivalent of modern day Liberland. If you guys have heard of Liberland, it's basically a micronation that exists between Serbia and Croatia in a little bit of territory that's claimed by neither area. So some politician out of the Czech Republic literally set up a micronation and has been at it for years, growing support and stuff for this micronation. Even got politicians of other countries such as Poland and the American politicians all on board due to the ideas behind the type of country that they'd set up here. But to this day, there's not too much actual physical infrastructure on the ground.
Small, unique political territory between...
Mainly because I think the Croatians keep going in there and wiping it out.
Germany and Belgium. It was seen as the perfect place to trial an Esperanto utopia, where the peaceful values of the language could be put into practice. Unfortunately, it never quite worked out, but by the turn of the century, Esperanto fever was in full flow, and in 1905 the first ever Esperanto conference was held here, in Boulogne-sur-Mer, aiming to promote and advance...
You know what's really interesting is it's never mentioned in Esperanto videos, or videos about Esperanto, maybe because it's just not common knowledge. But although Zamenhof created Esperanto and he promoted it, his actual big dream was not Esperanto. It was another thing called Homaranismo, which was a religious belief system that he created, where basically the idea was a unified religion for the world based on the most common tenets of all the religions out there. And also with an idea of, we come from no particular nation or country and stuff like that. And he actually wanted to promote Homaranismo more so than Esperanto at certain points during his life. But all the Esperanto speakers, the main Esperanto speakers at the time, they kept telling him, don't talk about Homaranismo, we don't want to taint the Esperanto movement, because a lot of the French supporters of the Esperanto speaking movement at the time were actually businessmen who saw it as a tool for business between countries, and they didn't want to link it to the philosophy or religion or anything like that. They felt like that would basically destroy it as a as a vehicle for their own desires, which was basically commercialization. So Zamenhof basically didn't speak about humanismo. And if you look at this particular photo here from the first World Congress of Esperanto, this is where he wanted to talk about it, and this was where he was advised not to.
The language's cause. Even the big man himself was there, and he would give a speech that would go down in Esperanto history. We stand one beside the other, not like strangers, but like brothers and sisters, who understand without distrusting because of dividing shadowy misunderstandings, who love one another and shake hands with one another, not hypocritically like foreigners, but sincerely, man to man.
Yeah, I've actually read that speech in Esperanto.
Flash forward 15 years, and with the small little world war out of the way, Esperanto's doctrine and idealism was now more relevant than ever beforehand. This is where things get really interesting. The newly formed League of Nations
so he is going to talk about the League of Nations. You can always expect this one.
is looking for ways to stop more of this. And so at the 1920 Assembly, the delegate...
Okay, I need to grab a bottle of water. So why do I need to grab a bottle of water, you're probably wondering? Because I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm going to have to correct right here.
Delegates get around the table. Step up Iran of all countries with a bold idea. Let's make Esperanto the official language for diplomacy.
Okay, let's get some background information going on here. So, at the time, the League of Nations was discussing what would be the working language for the League of Nations. And for those who don't know, the League of Nations was basically the precursor of the United Nations. Now, the most dominant language at the time was French. It was the language of basically international politics, business, pretty much everything. Although it was slowly losing its position at this time to English, which was chipping away at it. So the French were quite protective, let's say, of their sacred language at the time. When he says Iran came up with a bold idea, actually no, it was a delegate from Iran who was an Esperanto speaker. And this delegate basically represented Iran at the League of Nations. And Iran at the time only had a couple of delegates because, well, I'm pretty sure they were just broke and they didn't have the money to send delegates, or they weren't really interested. It's not really stated anywhere. So he basically went representing Iran, and when he went, what he proposed was that the international language should be Esperanto. That was the big thing that he wanted to do while he was there. Obviously, it doesn't have any impact on Iran, but since he funded himself to come here and Iran gave him permission to basically be their delegate, that's what he did.
To make it the international auxiliary language, to put in foundations for everyone to learn it as a second language. What a great idea, everyone says. So they put
Everyone did not say what a great idea.
it to a vote. We are one.
Okay, so the vast majority of the countries there, they really didn't care too much about this. They were more preoccupied about either fighting to make Spanish or French or even English as the international language. So they weren't particularly interested in, let's say, Esperanto.
Step away from Esperanto being adopted by what would eventually inspire the United Nations. Something that could, in theory, have changed the course of history, and possibly the language that you'd be listening to right now.
Yeah, no, this never would have happened, simply because everyone knew that when this came up for a vote, the French would shoot it down. The French were not going to give up their linguistic position of power. Would you? If you had the most dominant language in the world and you make money literally by the fact that you speak this language, which is what happens with English now. When you think about it, English as a language of instruction makes America and Britain a shite ton of money. But anyway, they weren't going to give up their position. So everyone knew the French were going to basically vote this down.
Slowly, the votes come in. There's 10 in favour. But wait, who's that? Bonjour. It turned out the French weren't too happy with being replaced as the long-standing language of international diplomacy, which at this point it had been for over 300 years. So they slapped a big fat veto on the idea, leaving Esperanto shelved and its ultimate aims agonisingly close to being set in motion. And the French even went one step further. Not content with condemning Esperanto on the world stage, they banned it in all of France's universities.
Okay, so this is an interesting one with them banning it. So what happened was, as a result of Esperanto getting shot down, the League of Nations decided, you know what, maybe it's a good idea that, we just teach Esperanto in schools. There's no harm in teaching it. So they proposed that within the League of Nations that schools should, provide instruction in Esperanto, which would have been a massive success. But it wasn't like something that you had to do, it was just like a proposal. Now the French, because they did not want anything at all to oppose their position, they literally just banned it within their own school system.
Universities were supposedly being a tool to spread communist propaganda. Rejected on the international stage, things only got worse for Esperanto in the following decades, and soon its speakers would find themselves persecuted and attacked in all manner of ways.
This is totally true. There is a book about this thick, which is called La Dangera Lingvo in Esperanto, and it basically details all the times in history that Esperanto speakers have literally been executed just for being Esperanto speakers.
Because much of Esperanto's philosophy was rooted in internationalist thinking, it soon found itself under attack from new regimes that wanted to promote nationalism and a distrust of foreign influence.
Who said that?
And because of Zamenhof's Jewish background, in 1925 Adolf Hitler would claim that Esperanto was part of a Jewish plot to take over the world. And the language would be banned in
Yeah, and funnily enough, as a result, if you spoke Esperanto, you ended up in the camps.
Germany in 1935. Esperanto speakers were also targeted in Russia as part of Stalin's Great Purge. Many Soviet Esperantists were arrested, exiled, or executed. And in Francoist Spain, Esperanto speakers were closely monitored and their actions restricted. Esperanto groups were soon.
In fact, this persecution spreads all around the world. I'm not sure if it was the FBI or the CIA, one of those two actually infiltrated the Esperanto movement within America, trying to seek out the communists, basically. And then also in Japan, because a lot of the Omoto religion there, a lot of the people who are followers of that religion also spoke Esperanto because Esperanto basically played a role within their religion. Basically, if you spoke Esperanto, you were persecuted in Japan as well. So you don't have a good time if you're an Esperanto speaker.
Forced to disband, and its speakers had little recourse against the repressive measures facing them. And so the language was forced underground. Many speakers were sent to concentration camps during World War II, and there are even stories of prisoners teaching the language as a covert one, hidden.
This right here, there was like this really old Esperanto speaker who's unfortunately no longer with us, but he used to go to the Esperanto house here in Sydney, and he would tell stories about how he learned Esperanto in the camps from someone else. So that is crazy. Maybe there was multiples.
From guards under the guise that it was Italian. After World War II, Esperanto's influence on the world stage would keep diminishing. The Esperanto conferences that began in 1905 would, however, still continue every year, and in fact they still do today.
I think the only time that they stopped in recent history was literally during COVID.
So what happened? Well, the reality is that it was hard to find speakers conversing outside of this bubble, so increasingly the language became...
Well, yeah, that's one of the reasons, but also that a mass amount of persecution, multiple wars did not help out.
a niche, and with a lack of institutional support or adoption for use by any major organisation.
The country that probably gives Esperanto the most support of any country would probably be China. In China, there is actual government funding and support for various Esperanto institutions within that country, although in recent years that support has been waning.
And the increasing dominance of English as the world's lingua franca, Esperanto
Funnily enough, English is also under attack a little bit within China as well. So a lot of tuition schools have been shut down because they just create an unwanted burden on students, and most of those are focused on English. And additionally, the government has been internally within discussions about reducing the requirement of English for university like entrance scores and stuff like that.
failed to keep up in a rapidly developing post-war world. Its influence was still to be found in interesting corners of popular culture, such as a 1966 horror film called Incubus, which was...
I have the most funniest clip on my YouTube channel of this video. So if you haven't recognized already, that is William Shatner, the guy who plays in Star Trek, okay? So he was in an Esperanto film. But this film's a weird film. It's like an artsy film from his early days. So I injected myself into this movie using a green screen, made myself black and white and everything. And it basically looks like William Shatner is trying to sexually assault me. I know that sounds funny as I'm going to drop a link down in the comments below for you guys if you want to check it out.
recorded entirely in Esperanto and features a pre-Star Trek William...
By the way, the Esperanto is shocking in this movie because none of these people are actual like Esperanto speakers, so they just pronounce it like English or French.
Shatner,
The aspecto estas pipona.
or a small snippet of the recording being included in the Voyager 1 Golden Record. Multiple references are made throughout the popular British sci-fi series Red Dwarf.
Wait a minute, I know this one. Don't tell me.
She's just saying that the weather's mild.
I hope when you come, the weather will be clement.
Or what about when Michael Jackson
Clement? Does that mean like mild or something? I've never heard that word in my life.
used it in a video to promote his 1995 album, His Story? And a little video game series called Grand Theft Auto would even name a certain car model after the language.
It has appeared in so many movies, it's not funny, but it's usually just hidden in the background, you don't notice it. For example, in Blade Trinity, if you pause the film, you'll notice pretty much most of the signs are in Esperanto. So they're implying that in this future world where Blade Trinity is happening, that, you know, the language is actually Esperanto. And there's a few street interactions where people actually talk to each other in Esperanto.
Esperanto would trundle along in the background of history until the 21st century arrived, when the internet breathed new life into it by facilitating communication between its speakers across the world in a way never seen before. It also made it easier for people to learn the language through dictionaries, YouTube channels and forums, and in 2015 it would be included on Duolingo. And at one point, over 1 million people were learning it on the app. In fact, so much was
I know the guy who actually started that entire course, Chuck Smith.
its popularity that in 2017 the Esperanto Association increased the number of beginner courses they offered fourfold to keep up with demand. This all leads us to today, where Esperanto is easily the most widely spoken constructed language in the world, with the amount of total speakers estimated to be somewhere in the region between 200,000 to 2 million.
So he's providing good estimates here.
Including some 1,000 speakers who were taught Esperanto as their native language. It's unlikely that Esperanto will ever see the popularity it did in the early 20th century. Instead, it is the English that me and you speak that has taken over the world.
I actually believe that Esperanto will continue to grow and grow over time, and it's not going to die out. I think it's basically just going to become a very interesting niche subculture that will just continue to exist. And in fact, translation technologies that now exist will help Esperanto in some ways, because a lot of people learn languages because they have an actual need to. But as that need disappears for the vast majority of people, they will just resort to translation technologies. And when someone wants to learn a language like I did, and they just want to like have the experience of learning a language as opposed to like a specific language, then you're going to pick up a lot of Esperanto speakers along the way who, exactly like me, they just wanted to learn a language.
But it's easy to forget that it wasn't always like this, and had certain things gone differently, we might be in a very different place. It's also unclear if Esperanto's ultimate aim to promote world peace would have worked, even if it was adopted, or if it could have stayed standardised at all. After all, languages are living things, even if they're conceived on paper.
That whole standardization thing, so I can easily read original texts that were written in Esperanto back in the original like documents with no problem. But you can see that the language has changed slightly. It feels slightly different, but it's completely 100% understandable. And I'm pretty sure now with technology, the only thing that's going to happen is like every time some type of new tech comes out or something, the language will change to accommodate these new words and phrases and stuff. And then maybe a couple of 100 years from now, we won't be able to read the original text. But I don't know. I feel like technology kind of helps stabilize a language quite a bit.
What is clear is that Esperanto was created with a noble purpose: to foster unity and peace through communication. And while it may not have become the world's second language, it had the balls to think outside the box. And in doing so, it created a vibrant and unique global community. And we can all take a little bit of humility from a certain Dr. Esperanto.
Overall, I'd say that was a pretty good video, like presented the history quite well. In fact, it was a very engaging video, although it did promote a couple of talking points which have been debunked before. And also, if you use your own logic, you realize, like, yeah, obviously the French are never going to give up their position to like a constructed language. Hell, the French to this day still do not accept English as the international language. I've got a funny story about that, where I was actually in France, and I remember I was there and I was trying, at the time something happened with me and my wife, and we got split apart, and I was speaking to one of those like people at the train station that will help you find your way, and I was asking him questions in English, and he was like, no English, no English, no English. And like I was like, you know what, F it, I'm gonna try Esperanto with this guy. He probably won't understand, but maybe he'll pick up enough words to get what I'm trying to ask him. And I was just trying to ask him, you know, where a certain platform was. And he listened for me a bit, and then he just went, stop. And then he spoke perfect English and just told me to go over that way. And I was like, bruh, what are you doing to me? Anyway, if there's any other videos you guys want me to review, just drop them in the comment section below, and I'll see you all in the next video. And if you're not there, I will force you to learn our sacred language.